The premise for maintaining a large arsenal of nuclear weapons is the issue of deterrence. The argument goes that a rational nuclear power would never attack another nuclear power for fear of retaliation that would annihilate both countries. Clearly, though, today, in the age when we have almost daily suicide terrorist bombings, the principle of deterrence is outmoded. And while we hear a lot about Iran's alleged nuclear weapons ambitions, there are still thousands of nuclear warheads and a great deal more weapons-grade nuclear material in the countries of the former Soviet Union that's only loosely secured. And Pakistan, with its nuclear weapons capability, its political instability, and the suspected terrorist havens in that country, is a grave concern as far as potential for a source of nuclear weapons for terrorist organizations. In the United States, we commonly assume that our own nuclear materials and nuclear weapons are so secure that they could never be diverted for terrorist purposes, but this may not be a reasonable assumption. In September of last year, it was reported that some Air Force pilots unknowingly flew nuclear warheads from North Dakota to Louisiana. Just in June of this year, the Pentagon admitted that some sensitive components of nuclear missiles had been misplaced and that we had inadvertently shipped nose cones for nuclear missiles to Taiwan. An investigation into these mishaps concluded that the gradual erosion of nuclear standards and a lack of effective oversight by Air Force leadership was widespread. And clearly we know from past events that terrorists always don't come from abroad. Prior to September 11th, 2001, the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil was the 1995 bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building by the decorated Gulf War veteran Timothy McVeigh. And just last week, the FBI reported that it had compelling evidence that the anthrax attacks of 2001 were committed by a United States scientist who had a mental disorder and who committed suicide when confronted with these charges. Even more frightening than the possibility of a terrorist attack with nuclear weapons is the possibility of accidental nuclear war. More than a decade now since the end of the Cold War, the United States and Russia still maintain thousands of nuclear weapons on hair-trigger alert. As Patsy alluded to, most of us in this audience, or many of us, are old enough to remember how close we came to nuclear war during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. But far fewer people realize that in 1995, we were on the verge of an accidental nuclear war. In that year, Russia mistook the launch of a Norwegian weather satellite for an incoming ICBM, and they woke up Boris Yeltsin in the middle of the night, and he had only a few minutes to decide whether or not to launch a nuclear counterattack on the United States. Fortunately, just at the last moment, it was determined that the rocket was veering away from Moscow, and an accidental nuclear war was narrowly averted. I think many of us in the audience might wonder what might have happened if our own current president had been in that situation. And expanding on that thought, there's the possibility that the President of the United States or a military leader in the United States might intentionally initiate a premeditated so-called preemptive nuclear strike against another country. After listening to the account of Reverend Oshida on the horrors of the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I think it's unthinkable to those of us in this audience that we would ever initiate such attack. But such an attack is not only thinkable, it's part of our nuclear posture review, a policy endorsed by politicians and military leaders in our country who call for the development of more usable nuclear weapons, who refer to the deaths of civilians in war as collateral damage, and who view future nuclear attacks as an option to be left on the table. I believe that the existence of nuclear weapons anywhere on our planet makes us all less safe. In 1970, 178 countries of the world, including the United States, signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And under this treaty, it was agreed that the nations that didn't already have nuclear weapons would not acquire them in return for the 5 nuclear powers at the time working toward worldwide nuclear disarmament. Well, 38 years later, most of the countries of the world have kept their part of the bargain. But the 5 original nuclear countries, of which we're one, and a few others, have not. I believe it's time for all the countries of the world to abide by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and to work toward worldwide nuclear disarmament.
Yes.
Thank you. Some people, of course, say that it's naive to think that we can ever achieve worldwide nuclear disarmament, and that the United States will always have to maintain nuclear weapons for its own security. Albert Einstein, whose theory of relativity predicted the power of the atomic bomb, and who later said that his participation in the development of the atomic bomb was the one big mistake that he had made in his life, disagreed with that premise. Einstein said, "The idea of achieving security through national armaments is, at the present state of military technology, a disastrous illusion. There is no possibility of control except through the aroused understanding and insistence of the peoples of the world." President Dwight Eisenhower, who was the Supreme Allied Commander during World War II in Europe, put it more bluntly. He said, "I think that people want peace so much that one of these days government had better get out of the way and let them have it." But governments that are composed of politicians funded by war profiteers are never going to voluntarily step aside. That's why we, the people, must take back our government by actively participating in the political process. And I know how distasteful it is participating in politics for many of us in this room. But to paraphrase the Greek philosopher Plato, either we participate in politics or we continue to be ruled by our inferiors. Today's event is focused on the issue of nuclear weapons, as well it should be, this being the 63rd anniversary of the nuclear attack on Nagasaki. But at the same time that we reflect on the devastation caused by nuclear weapons in the past and the possibility for even greater devastation in the future, I think it's important that we look beyond just the issue of nuclear weapons. Sir Joseph Rotblat was a nuclear physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project until it became obvious that Nazi Germany was going to be defeated before it developed the atomic bomb. At that point, Sir Joseph resigned from the Manhattan Project and spent the rest of his life working toward nuclear disarmament and won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in 1995. At the age of 90, Sir Joseph was asked what his ambitions were for the rest of his life. And he said he had 2 goals. His short-term goal was to abolish nuclear weapons. His long-term goal was to abolish war in all its forms. As horrific as the atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were, the World War II firebombings of Tokyo, Kobe, Osaka, and other Japanese cities actually killed more Japanese civilians. And although nuclear war has the potential to eradicate the entire human race almost instantaneously, day in and day out, human beings continue to slaughter each other through conventional war and small arms fire. Sir Joseph died at age 92 before he could accomplish either his short-term goal of abolishing nuclear weapons or his long-term goal of abolishing war altogether. So it's up to people like us gathered here today to continue this work. Let us make a commitment here and now to do everything within our power to abolish nuclear weapons and to abolish war in all its forms within our lifetimes, or at least like Sir Joseph, to die trying. Thank you very much.